myself, and I'm going to talk just a little bit about this series. My name is Jack Carroll. I'm one of the housemasters at Massey Hall, and this is a series that we are sponsoring jointly with Adam Reynolds, who's one of the ministers at the Religious Center over here, and also Aaron Scheinberg, who's his Secular Society is the other co-sponsor of these events. And the idea behind the events is to bring together people with very different points of view and find out what it is that we have in common. So the focus is on how people find meaning in life, and we're not proselytizing, we're not pushing any particular position. In fact, we would like people to hear from other people with different points of view and find out how they find meaning in life. So that's what this kind of get-together is about. This is the second in this series, and it's probably the last for the spring, unless somebody comes up with a really good idea, and we invite good ideas. So if you have one, let us know. But we intend to pick it up again in the fall as well. Okay. The format here is to have a couple of speakers, and they will talk about their particular experiences for the first part of this meeting. And then we'll open up the discussion at the tables, and people will talk to each other and kind of share experiences at the table, and then come back for a question and answer at the end. Okay? So that's the format. All right? Does that make sense to people? Everybody have any questions? No? Okay. There are some sheets on the table. If you could pass them around, we'd like to know who is here. So if you want to just jot your name down, that would be great. If you'd like to be informed about future events and you want to put your email address down there, we'll add you to the list and send that out. Okay? So let me introduce, I think I've said everything I need to. Okay. I would like to introduce Michael Fu, who's going to introduce our speakers.
All right, so welcome to the second session of How Do You Mean? Tonight, we're going to have two speakers. The first one is Dave Schmelzer. As a college student, Dave quickly became a well-known atheist personality. His debates with people of faith often drew big crowds. Identity crisis ensued when he began to suspect that God was speaking to him through prayer. After semesters of researching world religions, Dave began to suspect that these experiences had something to do with Jesus. He spent 2 years at Caltech as a chaplain before realizing he was on the wrong coast, and now he is the lead pastor of the biggest church in Cambridge. He hasn't forgotten his atheist days and has developed a specialty in helping curious secular people explore faith. He's the author of Not the Religious Type, Confessions of a Turncoat Atheist. Our second speaker tonight will be Jerry DeWitt, who led a slightly different life path. Jerry gave his first sermon at age 17 and immediately knew that he wanted to become a preacher. He became well known for the power of his sermons, often preaching to large crowds of Pentecostals. Over time, as he researched other schools of thought, Jerry found his faith steadily eroding. After 25 years as a minister, he came out as a non-believer. Now he preaches a message of hope to those who are riddled with doubt and applies his pastoral skills and love for people to supporting others in their journeys from faith to atheism. So without further ado, let's have a big hand for both of these, and Dave Schmelzer will speak first.
Maybe I'll stand so I can survey you all. Fun to be here and very fun to get to meet Jerry.
Pleasure.
So it's a great joy to get a chance to be with you all tonight. So my background, I was born in San Diego, so again on a different coast than here. And my parents were not particularly church-going sorts of people. My dad had a bad experience with a small Catholic congregation in a farming town, in a tiny little town in Iowa. He grew up as a subsistence farmer. And I still to this day don't know entirely all the bad stuff that happened, but the net effect was he just didn't want anything to do with it anymore. It left a really bad taste in his mouth. And my mom, I think, would be someone that you would characterize I guess the technical phrase would be as a nominal Christian. If you were to ask her when I was born, did she believe in God or believe in Jesus? Absolutely, unquestionably yes. She'd even had, I think, a spiritual encounter with, I don't know, something supernatural to her satisfaction when she was in college. I don't think I still know quite that story, but it's shaken her up. On the other hand, she married my dad, who was not a churchgoer in any respect, and that was sort of the household I was born into. But by the time I and my older sister came around, I'm 50, so I was born in '62, and it was right at the height of kind of Cold War civil religion really kicking into gear. And so in America at that time, my read is that the way we weren't going to be commies is that we were the ones who believed in God. And so it was right about that point that in God we trust got put on money, and that was sort of what it meant to be a good American. And so my mom, I think, said to my dad, we have kids now, so it'd be fine for us not to be churchgoers when we didn't have kids, but it's all good Americans, you need to raise your children in churches. And so he reluctantly agreed, and they started taking my sister and I to a denominational church in town. I never actually, to this day, I've not been to a service at that church. I was just in the kids' church program. But I don't think an exaggeration to say that my sister and I hated it just beyond hating it. We just loathed it. My memory is that the kids' church program there was taught by older women who didn't like children. There was just always that sense that we would show up of disappointment that we'd come back that week. And we felt like we had common cause with the teachers. We didn't want to come back, our parents made us do it. That was where they had their beat. And so when I was 10, my sister, who is to this day, bolder temperament than I, kind of had it out with my parents. And she basically said, Dave and I both hate this church thing. We do not want to go back. In fact, I refuse to go back. Dave agrees with me. He's too cowardly to tell you. He's only behind some piece of furniture. But that is just the way it is. And my dad, of course, had been waiting for this moment of liberation his whole life. So my mom was just on an island and trying to hold out, and she didn't have the votes. And so that was it. We were no longer churchgoers. And in fact, my parents only resumed church going like 5-6 years ago. They did, for a variety of reasons, which is another story. But, so that was kind of my church experience. And so I was always kind of an intense philosophical kid. I don't think one reason I wanted to leave Southern California, everyone I knew wanted to stay in Southern California, but I wanted to get out. And I think one reason I wanted to get out is I was too intense for Southern California. That the kind of ethos at my school was a little bit of like, if you've got problems, chill out. Head to the beach. Come on. And strangely enough, as kind of what became kind of the lone atheist in my crowd, I always thought, here's the thing, unlike all you churchgoers, I believe life has meaning. I don't believe you do. I believe the kind of church-going ethos here is an ethos of just chill out, go to church, shut up, just kind of do what you're supposed to do. And I couldn't go along with that. And so I remember as I tried to figure out, so what do I believe about the world? I tried prayer, nothing much seemed to happen with that. And finally I found myself kind of picking fights in my high school with churchgoers who were predominantly Christian churchgoers. There was a Mormon contingent, I would pick fights with them as well. Very small Jewish contingent. I didn't pick as many fights with them, but I had a few. And I just found myself, if I would meet anybody and I would find out they were a churchgoer, I would find myself asking a question. I would say, why do you go to church? And the customary answer would be, well, because my parents take me to church. Why do you think I go to church? I'm a kid. And then I would say, well, do you believe in God? And the customary response would be yes. And I would say, why? And they would often say things like, well, because my parents, they believe in God, and that's good enough for me. And my response to that would be, that's okay, but I don't have your family, and so that's not going to persuade me. Some of them would push back further, and they would say, well, I don't know. I pray and stuff happens. And I would say, can you give me an example? And they might say something like, well, last week, I felt sick and I prayed about it and I feel better. And my comeback would be something like, that's good, but in modern science, I just read this recently, has discovered this amazing thing called getting better. And I'm pretty sure that can happen whether or not you prayed. And usually at that point, the response to me would be, you're mean, and they would leave. But on occasion, I would go further, and the pushback, usually the next level of pushback would be, well, I have a relationship with God, or with Jesus. And I would say, fascinating, a relationship, like meaning you relate meaning you catch a movie with Jesus, or you go rock climbing with Jesus. I mean, normal relationships I have are two-way. And so how do you know? I mean, what's the basis of this relationship you have? And they would do their best to explain, how they felt God was alive to them in some way that was meaningful to them. So I kind of had that reputation in high school, but at the same time, I was always drawn to people. I was the one who picked the fights. They weren't. And so there was something going on for me that there was a bee in my bonnet that I couldn't drop. The first girlfriend I had, a serious girlfriend, was a very serious churchgoer. My closest friend in high school was a very serious churchgoer. So I tended to be around that crowd, but I would poke and prod at them. And I would say, by the end of my high school days, I had a philosophy. And my philosophy was, I don't know if it would be accurate maybe to say that I was an atheist, a true atheist. It would be accurate to say I was a hard-line agnostic. That what I felt was, from everything I'm hearing in these conversations, there's a God up there, and in the view of the believers, there's a God up there and we're down here. But if that's true, my point of view would be there's no meaningful communication between up there and down here. I could not prove there was no God up there. I did not prove that, but neither could I be persuaded by anyone else's proof that there was. Because it seemed to me there's no such thing as an answered prayer that's incontrovertible, that no skeptical person could ever dispute. It was always disputable. You had to accept it from whatever it meant to accept on faith from your point of view. And that was fine. And once I couldn't prove they were wrong, maybe those prayers were answered. What did I know? But it wasn't meaningful to me, and I didn't think it was possible for it to be meaningful to me or to anybody coming from an outside perspective. And basically that's where I landed. I go to college. I went to Stanford on the West Coast, and I arrive at this college, and within my first few days there, I found myself in a familiar little tiff. And so I was seated, it was the pre-freshman experience. I was at dinner at the dining hall, and I hear three guys talking about going to church. And it's like a Pavlovian response that would draw out of me. And I said, oh really, you go to church? And they'd say, yes. And I'd say, why? And we kind of got into it. Well, we got into it to a heated enough degree that we drew crowds. And to the point that we got kicked out of the dining room, we moved it into a living room area. We might have drawn 30 or so people who were cheering on their respective sides of the debate. And in this instance, what I would say is, they fought me to a draw, or I fought them to a draw. They were smarter people. They were a higher caliber of debater than I had experienced in my high school. I'm proud to say I don't think they beat me, but on the other hand, I did not obviously take them down. And that kind of got me a reputation as the dorm atheist. I became the representative of the person that atheists would gather around. My roommate was an atheist. Actually, one of the few people I knew who had published. He published poetry in Harper's Magazine before arriving as a freshman in college. And so this kind of smart, artsy guy, and we bonded over them. But within a short period of time, I started having troubles. I think a lot of my troubles were classic going to college troubles, no different than anybody else's troubles. I was dislocated. I never lived away from home, like people often who've gone away to college, and so I felt a little dislocated there. I initially was wondering if I would do well. I was at this hoity-toity school, and I wasn't initially. I was getting counter encouraging feedback that maybe I wasn't going to do that well. And so that got me feeling dislocated. And I just began to feel gloomy. I didn't quite know why I felt gloomy. And I began asking myself, who can I talk to about this? Who could make me feel better? And I couldn't come up with anybody. I thought, I'm not going to call home, that'd be pathetic, Mom and Dad, I'm depressed. I didn't have friends in my first few months on campus that I felt I could go deep in that way with. And so I felt kind of stuck. And I realized I was stuck on a couple of levels. One way that I was stuck was philosophical. And the philosophy that was causing me problems, I would attribute to my dad. That my dad had a view of the world, which maybe I would summarize this way. Here's like the 6-step plan to having a life you're going to like. My dad's own story is fascinating. He'd grown up as a subsistence farmer. He'd basically run away from home. He took the family car, which he had paid for with outside earnings. He felt justified in the dead of night to run away from home to go to college, which he did. And so he went from subsistence farming to being a mega successful attorney in California. And that had given him a fairly defined view of life. And if you could summarize it, it might be, one, being rich is better than being poor. He had seen both sides of that spectrum. And the way to get a comfortable life kind of said, the job of a child is to get good grades. That's the only occupation you have as you're a student. Perhaps at MIT you can relate to this philosophy of life. And you get good grades when you're just a little kid for the all-important task of learning how to get good grades by the time you get to high school when your grades matter. And then you really got to get good grades because you could get into some good school out there. And however good a school you can go to, you want to get really good grades at that school because that will make you attractive to employers. And then you probably want to go to grad school and get good grades there, and then you'll get your employer, and then you'll go on from there. And after you get your good grades, you want to find a good person to marry and raise your kids and make a lot of money and leave it to them when you die. That's the plan. And so within my first month or two in college, I suddenly thought, what kind of stupid plan is that? I thought of it for a couple of reasons. One, it wasn't where I was going to get good grades. And so I thought, what if there is a weak link in the chain? What if, is life over as we know it if at one point I don't get good grades anymore and then it all goes? In the end I did fine, but at the time there was discouragement. But secondly, I suddenly thought, well, hang on, now that I'm here, where does this lead? And I thought, well, my dad again was a really successful attorney. His goal was that I would join him in practicing law, or that I would work my way up a kind of legal ladder the way he had done. And I knew enough about lawyers to know that was sort of there were quirks to that plan. So I thought, so let me get this straight. I get good grades here, I go to law school, get good grades at law school, and then I get a job with a firm, and I become a junior associate. Junior associates famously work slave labor hours. They work 100-hour weeks. They do all the scut work of the firm, and they never sleep, and they're relatively low paid. But the reason they do it is to become partners, and they get on a partner track where you suddenly do reap the financial rewards of your firm. I remember saying to my dad at one point, so the gravy train starts when you're a partner, right? You've been working all these horrible hours, but now you're a partner, and then that's when the good life is. And my dad said, well, no, you still work the crazy hours. I said, why is that? He said, well, the partners are shouldering the whole load of the firm on their shoulders. They're bringing in the business, and they're the ones, they got to keep an eye on the store. If they're not doing their job, all those jobs are at risk. So no, you're still working like crazy. I said, so when does the good stuff kick in? And he says, like retirement. I said, yeah, I'm 18 years old, and I'm looking, do they retire at 65? He says, no, most go into their 70s. I said, okay, so I'm 18 years old, and the whole plan continues where the good times start when I'm 71, 72. And, if I live 3 or 4 more years, I'll have 3 or 4 really good years at the end that I've all of this prep time for. And he said, well, you put it that way, it sounds bad. But and so all those things, I just got gloomy. I suddenly thought, what is the plan of my life? This can't be it. And I got depressed. And I suddenly thought, how can I feel better? I thought, well, I don't know. Maybe the Christians are right. And maybe I'm wrong. What do I know? And so I decided that day to pray for the first time since I've been 10. And I remember what I prayed. Well, I knew what I wanted out of it. I didn't necessarily believe there was even a possibility of a God who would change my circumstances. But what I thought is, maybe I could just get some perspective if there was something more in the universe. And so I went back to my dorm room. I closed all the shades because I was, after all, the dorm atheist. And I think I can almost quote what I prayed. I think what I prayed was, God, I don't believe you exist. However, on the off chance that I'm wrong, today would be an excellent day to tell me amen. And, nothing happened, no lightning, no nothing like that. But I thought, well, Fui, I want to get off this campus. It's depressing me because my dad was wealthy. I had a car. And so I thought, great, I'll get in my car, I'll go see a movie. And on my way to see a movie, I took what at the time would have been cassette tapes with me of a conference that my sister, my older sister, who'd gotten us out of churches, had gone to. She went to University of Southern California and had gone to a Christian conference and liked the speaker. She'd sent me the tapes. I had said to her that I was offended that she'd sent them to me, that she knew that wasn't where I was at. She pushed back justly by saying she was at the time a Taoist. She said, Dave, I'm a Taoist. I'm not trying to convert you to Christianity. I just thought this was a good speaker you might enjoy. And I said, Fui, and I put him away, I didn't listen to him. But that night I thought, okay, tonight would be, I'll pull him out. And so I pulled him out, and I headed off to my movie, and listened to this guy. I have no idea who it was, because whoever it was, I gave the tapes back to my sister. She then lost them, and she has no memory of who it is. So whoever it was somebody. But I liked the guy. And what I liked it was that he spoke English. I had felt in the few churches I had visited, my mom would occasionally force my family to go to church on either Easter or Christmas. And I always felt when I went to those church services, it wasn't that I disagreed with the speaker. It was that I didn't understand what the speaker was trying to communicate. There was some sort of language that was just an in-crowd sort of language. And so I always thought, I would love to push back, but I don't even know I don't even know what you're saying. Whereas this guy was clear. He wanted me to believe in God and think that following Jesus was a smart move with my life. That was his obvious agenda. And I thought, fair enough, at least it's overt. I get what you're trying to say. Go for it. And whatever he said, I don't remember this day what it was, but I thought, well, okay, plausible. At least it's not crazy talk. And I saw my movie. I'm driving back. I get disoriented, which is unusual for me. I have a pretty good sense of direction, though I was still obviously new to that area. And I thought, where am I supposed to go again? It's obviously before GPS. And so I'm saying to myself, I think I take a right at this kind of street. So I took a right. It was obvious as I did that I had gone down a road that I hadn't been on before. And it was this dark, kind of small road, no cars were on it. I thought that wasn't good. So I pulled out a map, and I did that little trick, which nobody ever has to do anymore because you have GPS, which in the old days would happen sometimes. I was driving really slowly on this deserted road. I turn on my dome light. I put the map in my hand, holding it on the steering wheel, and I'm trying to kind of look across streets and kind of try to figure out where I am while I'm very slowly going on this road. And I found out where I was because the road forked, and I was looking down when it happened, and when I looked up, I was going off the road. Now again, I was going slow, and it wasn't like a canyon, it was like a little hill. And so I'm bouncing up this hill, I slam on the brakes, I come to rest against a post with kind of a satisfying thunk. I had a Volvo of the era, which had these massive bumpers, so I wasn't really worried about my car. But I had to kind of catch my breath, and I looked down at my map, and I think, oh yeah, I see where I am, right there, fork in the road, yeah, that's me. And so I slowly backed down the hill to see if I damaged whatever this post was, and I discovered, interestingly enough, that the post I hit was an intriguing post. On the little hill was a church, and the post I hit was a giant floodlit cross. They lit up in their little... And so I'm sort of angled up, filling my windshield with this giant floodless cross. I'm hearing this guy in the background talking about Jesus on the tape. And I say to myself, that's odd. Most days I wouldn't notice such a thing, but just today I did pray if there's a God, he would show himself to me. How many other crosses have I rammed in my life? And so I catch my breath, and I kind of file that one away under intriguing experiences, and I head off from my campus. I get disoriented and kind of a second time. I think, this time pull over, don't do this driving thing. So I pull over into a kind of lit up lot, and on the street, and I check across street on my way in, and so I check the map, okay, there's where I am. So I'm pulling back out, I realize it's a church parking lot, and I pulled up underneath a giant floodlit cross in their parking lot. I just sort of pulled up right directly underneath it, and I'm pulling out and I'm thinking, that's a giant floodlit cross. That's the second in 10 minutes, what are the odds? And I have a strong impression at that moment. It was by no means a voice, but it was certainly a very strong sort of internal impression. And I can almost quote it. It was, Dave, you always thought that if there was a God, the good news would be that he cares about, or he, she, whatever, cares about humanity. I'm here to tell you, there is a God and I care about you. I strongly felt that. And I thought, well, where did that come from? And then I realized my whole philosophical objection to faith was, there's a God up here, we're down here, there's no meaningful communication. And I thought, well, what if that was just communication? And what if it's bridgeable? And so I went back found my way back. I'd heard almost the entire conference at this point of the speaker. And I tell no one. Again, I'm a dorm atheist. And so I tell no one. I just got to soak that one in. That was a strange night. And so I decided to do what had gotten me the strange night in the first place. I decided to pray with whatever prayer looked like. And so I started taking walks because I couldn't stay in my room because of my roommate, things like that. So every night I would take a walk. And I just futzed around saying kind of like, hey, universe, whoever's out there, whatever's going on, how's life? I didn't really know what to say. And but just trying to see if there was more going on out there than I could know. And after 3 months of fairly diligent attention to that, I was persuaded there was something going on. And so I started thinking, who can I tell about this? And I ended up talking to a young woman on my hall in a co-ed dorm who was a devout Catholic. And I said, can I tell you a story? And she said, sure. And I told her the story I just told you. And I said, do you have any conclusions from your story, from my story? And she said, I do. You're a Christian. I said, I don't think that's a good, I don't think I am. I think if you were to have said, I think you're a theist, meaning you believe there's a God or something going on out there, that might be closer to the mark. I think I do. I think you're right. I think I do think there's something going on out there. But I don't see why Christian would be the label you would put. She said, you rammed crosses. I said, well, what are the odds of me ramming a mosque in this neighborhood? I'm not sure I'm sold. And so then I had the brilliant insight. I thought, well, the good news is I am at a university. There's all these electives I can take. They teach religion courses. Maybe I could take such a thing. And so I started taking comparative religion courses. And I tended towards the mystical because that had been my experience. And so I took a course on Sufi Islam because the Sufis were the mystics in Islam. I took a course on modern day Judaism. I started reading up on all the major Eastern religions. My sister was a Taoist, so I could pick her brain on that front. And I had a fascinating experience with that. And so I went up to each professor and came clean by the time we were done. So I remember going up to the Sufi Islam professor and saying, can I tell you why I took this course? After reading all the stuff. And I said, some stuff sort of happened to me and I gave a vague storyline that I just told you. And I said, I'm really just trying to figure out what I believe or what's going on. Is there any chance, given the story you just heard, that I'm a Sufi? And he said, you know, no, I don't think so. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, you know, you could be, I can understand why you would think maybe you were, because we're the mystical branch of Islam, and I guess you've had sort of mystical experiences, you feel like, you know, on this prayer experience of yours. Here's the difference. He said, in Sufism, you're looking for, it's almost like an impersonal mystical experience, something that feels transcendent, it's a sensation, but it's not going to be, you're describing something more personal, that you feel like there's something out there trying to get your attention. Is that accurate? And I said, yeah, that's probably accurate. And he said, yeah, that in the Islamic tradition, that would be regarded as being a prophet. And he says, and obviously there's space for that, so in that sense you would have a category. Here's the deal though with prophets. One, they're rare. You know, like once a millennium, so you'd be kind of a big deal. And secondly, technically speaking, the last prophet was Muhammad, and anyone who claims to be a prophet after that, it doesn't go well for them usually. And so my encouragement is I don't think you're a Sufi. So I trotted over to my modern day Judaism professor, who was the sweetest guy known to man, young man. He invited the whole class to the circumcision of his baby son, and he just took us into kind of his life. And I could not have been a nicer guy. And so I felt safe with him to tell him my story, and I told him my story. And I said, is there any chance I'm a Jew? And he said, yeah, I told him about the response I'd gotten from the Sufi Islam guy. And he said, yeah, no, it's interesting. He says, I would have a very similar response as your Sufi professor. He said, you would think there would be, in the category, at least in my tradition, that you would have, and you've now read the Hebrew Bible, Dave, so you would know this, is a prophet. I mean, that would be the category. There's certainly a robust heritage of prophets in Judaism. But in modern Judaism, at least, I have no friends who would tell a story like you've told. And so it would be a kind of a historic sort of thing. And I said, that feels like too much pressure. He said, I thought it would feel like too much pressure, so I don't know. And so I just kind of hung out. I started going, I found a friend who led a Christian Bible study, like of about 10 people. And he's actually one of the 3 people I debated. I found him. And I said, so take me into this Christian thing, and you know, can you help me? And so I went to this little Bible thing he talked about, and about 2 years into this process, I just thought, I think it's about Jesus, in my instance at least. And it was because of the personal thing. I started reading the New Testament. I came to this passage in the book of Acts that says, oh, well, Jesus is going to come, and then there's going to be this big important thing called the Holy Spirit's going to come. And when that happens, everyone hears from God who connects with the Holy Spirit. Young people, old people, they dream dreams, they have visions. It's going to be normative. And I thought, well, that seems like my experience. And if it's normative, that feels better than I'm a once a millennium prophet. And so I started pursuing that just based on that rationale, and kind of went from there. So I'll stop. That's my basic story. So how about meaning? Because I haven't nailed that one down. I think for me, meaning has become increasingly relational, and so in that sense, all of the my poor high school friends who I, you know, belittled and berated. One quick cute anecdote: I ended up working as was described as a chaplain at Caltech for a while, and I was invited by a group at USC under Southern California to speak to a Christian group there. I showed up, and one of these people I had debated in high school was in the group. She had stopped out. She hadn't gone to college right away, but several years in, she'd gone to college. She was an undergrad, though I was a grad student and doing this chaplain thing. And I walk into her group, and she says, Dave Schmelzer, of all the people I never would have expected to walk into a Christian group, this is unbelievable. It's you. And I said, actually, there's more. I'm your speaker tonight. But so, all to say, but I think their pitch to me is one that's been meaningful to me. Is that I would think meaning for me increasingly is a relational meaning. And that I do feel like what was accomplished by those prayers when I was feeling gloomy, I think what was accomplished for me is feeling connected. It was probably the best way to put it. And so Jerry and I were talking over dinner about Roger Ebert's creed, about how he his view of life, which is fantastic. And I thought I was really struck by Roger Ebert's died 2 days ago, as you may have heard. If not, I have sad news for you. He died recently. Outspoken atheist, and it was a really thoughtful creed. And I thought, I both believe his creed. I mean, I want to live it. So in that sense, I thought he's got me. On the other hand, I think the only difference I would say is there's something relational and personal that has been meaningful to me, that the universe is not cold and impersonal, but alive and rich. There's something going on out there that I'm a part of a bigger story, that maybe there's ways in which I can at least tap into it and invite others to kind of be on that same journey with me, has been quite meaningful to me. And in that sense, the fact that I didn't end up a lawyer, not that all of you, if you happen to go to law school, bless you, I can't understand why you beat MIT going to law school, but maybe there's a reason. And so, nothing against lawyers, but for me, that also seemed like a dog-eat-dog universe. And so somehow finding a way in which my life could be about helping people find connection has been quite meaningful. Over to you.
I too am going to stand up in order to survey the crowd, but it won't be nearly as effective for me as it is for Dave. I'm glad it's not a debate, not just because he is a foot taller than me, but because there's so little that I would find to disagree with. You know, I'm the atheist in this event, and so how many of you know my story? Does anybody know anybody? Golly, you were right. Look at there. Normally, where y'all been? You ever heard of this thing called the internet? The reason that I'm glad that it's not a debate is because, like Dave, I think that where meaning is really at is in relationships. And so far, maybe you'll pull things out in the question and answers, but even though I'm to represent the atheist part of the presentation, there's nothing about Dave that I would want to change. There's nothing about Dave that I don't like, and I don't think there's anything about Dave that I don't understand. And it's that very fact that has brought me to this conclusion that meaning really is just what Dave said. It really is about relationships. And it's really about you. Now, like Dave, I went through my own journey with religion. I was a Pentecostal preacher for 25 years, pastored a couple of different churches, was an associate pastor at a few different churches. And unlike other atheists, I don't say that I lost my faith, because I don't feel like I lost anything. I feel like that this has been one long spiritual journey. And if I have to relate back to the past, instead of saying I lost my faith, and this may sound somewhat egotistical, I prefer to say that I graduated from my course in religion. I feel as if I studied it all along through the course of my life, that I gave it a very fair try, and I invested my life and my family's life in it to the extent of truly sacrificing 25 years in the ministry itself. It may surprise you to know that I gave up being a Christian some time before I gave up being in the ministry. And that usually creates a little bit of conscious dilemma for some people, like, well, you lying hypocrite. You know, you cheat. You were in it for the money. Well, you can tell the way that I'm dressed, I wasn't in it for the money. But why would you stay in the ministry if you had already lost your faith, using normal terminologies, and were no longer a Christian? And it's simple. It's because I really did love everyone that I was ministering to. And I could not, for the life of me, I didn't know that a secular world existed. I didn't know there were other ways to live. I had been brought up around Christianity. Some of my earliest memories, I suffered with earaches. That may have been what stunted my growth, I'm not sure. But some of my earliest memories was my head in my grandmother's lap with a warm washcloth against the throbbing ear, and her praying, and praying earnestly and sincerely to the point that she would speak in other tongues, and I would feel these goosebumps, as we would call them, these doodads, run up and down my body. And I was taught very early in life that God did care about me in particular, and that very sensation was tangible proof of not only God's existence, but God's relationship with me. That was some of my earliest memories that I can have. I grew up in that kind of environment and spent the majority of my adulthood engaged in those kind of relationships, completely unaware that there was another way of looking at the world. Completely unaware that there was another way of looking at the universe. There truly was nothing attractive outside of the church world. There was no warmth. There was no color. There was no relationships. And there certainly, in my mind at that time, was no ministry. And that's all I knew. If I couldn't stand in front of a group of beautiful people like you and look you in the eyes and feel you looking back at me and knowing that we're connecting and that we're bonding in some way, even if it's just temporary, but for that brief moment, we've shared in this existence as we pass through time. If I couldn't experience that, I didn't know what to experience. I didn't know what else there was for meaning in life outside of ministry. And so even after I graduated from my religion secretly, unbeknownst to most of the people around me, I still clung and tried to do everything I could to stay in the ministry. And I played with language, and I played with terminologies, and to ease my own conscience, I had moved into deism, far away from theism for reasons that's not important for this discussion. And I would take the Jeffersonian Bible that I'd printed out off the internet, I would take it to the pulpit. And in front of a very fundamentalistic, charismatic church, I would read the Gospels out of Jefferson's version, picking and choosing version, because it made me feel better in my conscience. It made me feel like I was bridging this gap, that somehow I could be true to myself secretly, but at the same time I could still minister and I could still be effective. And I didn't even know if there was a better answer out there for anyone. I faced this huge void. Not just a void of meaning and a void of ministry, but a void of how do we deal with life. Because you're already starting to come to the impression, if you haven't already, that life is difficult. That life is filled with challenges. And life is filled with questions that many times people don't have good answers for. And sometimes you just endure it, but at least in my Christian philosophy, at least in the ministry, I was able to take those people that I loved and embrace them and say, yeah, this sucks. And yeah, we've prayed and the cancer hasn't gone away. Or yes, we prayed and your loved one did die, but there's a future where you're going to be reunited. This life is just a dress rehearsal. This life is not what matters. So let your heart be filled with this joy that's unspeakable and understand that you're going to meet that grandfather, that grandmother, that mom, that dad, that sister, that brother. You're going to meet them again. And it would bring comfort. And it would help the person pass through those difficult times. And so as I approached what I saw as this void of no theology, of no theism, now no deism, no backup plan, no parachutes, no ministry, no community, no church, no relationships. As I approached that void, I was horrified. And whenever I would study on it a little bit, as much as I loved Carl Sagan and as much as I loved Stephen Hawkins and as much as I loved the vastness and the largeness of the universe, it seemed cold and it seemed dead and it seemed lifeless. And what do you tell the grieving parent who's just lost their child? I did have answers. Even whenever I didn't believe the answers, the answer was better than no answer. At least that's the way I felt at the time. And so this void was all-encompassing, and I was horrified. And I won't go into all the story tonight, but what I had to realize was that I was left with a choice. I was left with a choice of either letting people know who I really was and where I was really at in my own thinking, or I was left with a choice of pretending to believe for the sake of a lot of reasons, some of which I just mentioned, right? But the reality of it was I did not believe. I had taken all the courses, I had gone through all the studies, not in a university somewhere, not just in someone's mentorship, but in actual practice and actual life. And I'd come out on the other end very agnostic, and my opinion had become atheistic. And so as I said, my choices were, I could either begin to talk about that and try to make that okay in our society, or I could just let everyone continue to believe that I believed. So now was the dilemma. I already knew instinctively what I had to do. I had been raised as a preacher. I had been raised to preach the truth. I had been raised to tell other people what I thought was important and what I thought to be true. And I knew I couldn't do any different, that I had to begin to be somewhat vocal, not in a debating way, not in an ugly way, but I had to be somewhat vocal about what I found to be true. But the greatest dilemma that was that if you were on the fence, if you felt like I was feeling, if you'd come to the same conclusions that I'd come to, and then I came up there and supported you with that and said, hey, it's okay for you in the 21st century in the United States, you shouldn't be ostracized for not believing in God. If I came and supported you with that, indirectly, I was also supporting your step a little closer to the void. Does that make sense to everybody? Because I didn't have all these answers for meaning. And so as I came out publicly, life began to disintegrate. I'd already stopped preaching as much as I could. I'd already stopped taking obligations. I was no longer pastoring. I had a secular job. But I began to work on the internet a little bit, and I joined this group called the Clergy Project, and then I joined this other group called Recovering from Religion. And I really thought nobody in my little world would care, that I could somehow get away with this. But sure enough, I had an 85-year-old aunt who I was friends with on Facebook. And I began to make some relationships with some agnostics and some people who consider themselves to be skeptics and secular. And so, to have some continuity in my relationships, I tweaked my Facebook profile just a little bit. And under religion, I had changed it to secular humanist. Because I realized some of my values. I was starting, you see, as I was finally moving into the intellectual space where I could talk to myself without feeling forced to echo someone else's voice, I began to learn about Jerry. This other person was a person that had been shaped by family tradition, had been shaped by culture, who had then been shaped by career, who had been shaped by every time that he got up and preached and walked someone through the sinner's prayer and helped someone have a relationship with Jesus. That Jerry had been shaped by all these outside forces, but now suddenly, with all of that gone, now Jerry was able to talk to Jerry. And I realized that what had motivated me for the ministry in the first place was that I really was a humanist. All along, I was on this quest to try to ease human suffering, and that's why the void was so damn scary. Because suddenly I was going to have to admit that I didn't know how to end some human suffering. I didn't know how to make certain things better. And by promoting this new opinion that I had, I was actually going to encourage other people to not know as well. And so, being intellectually honest, I changed my Facebook a little bit. And Aunt Grace, oddly enough, her name is Grace, believe it or not. Aunt Grace made sure that a lot of people in my family knew that I changed a few things on my profile. So she could pray for me and others could pray for me, of course. And before long, the gossip spread through family, and after that, the gossip spread through our town, and it's a small town of 10,000. We don't call our counties counties, we call them parishes. And through our parish, though it's one of the largest land masses in Louisiana, still yet there's only 40,000 residents within this entire county, if you will. So almost everybody knows everybody. So before long, the whole thing, this story, had gotten completely out of control. And it was never really my intention to even call myself an atheist. I was so excited about learning that Jerry DeWitt really was a humanist and always had been. But now the label was beginning to be important, and the thing spread. And my best friend that I was working for with a secular job called me in on December the 1st, 2011, and fired me because I was dangerous for his business in that very religious climate. And what happened at that moment was that the void came to me. Because very shortly after, I found myself in foreclosure with my home. Before long, I would have to file bankruptcy, Chapter 13, in order to save our dream home. Before long, the ostracism within our little religious community would become so great that my wife wouldn't be able to take the pressure, and she left me. And left the town and left the state in order to escape this atmosphere. And before long, I found myself laying in the bed, alone, empty pillows next to me, with very few friends, almost no family connections, absolutely no financial support, and everything that I had worked for as an adult for 25 years had been instantly stripped away because I had been honest and had stopped pretending that I believed something that I didn't believe. And it was the best moment of my life. Because there was nobody to pray to. For years, I had gone through hardships. I had lost loved ones. There had been problems just like everyone else. There had been sicknesses. There had been financial crises. There had been all of these situations in times past. But at this particular moment, unlike all those others, it was just Jerry DeWitt laying in the bed, completely by himself, with no one to talk to but himself. Completely enveloped by the void. And this fantastic, beautiful, majestic thought began to drift into my mind. If I'm right, I love to say that agnosticism is my conclusion to my religious studies. That after studying and being in relationship with God and Jesus Christ for 25 years, all I can tell you is that I have more questions than answers, and it's almost impossible to get those answers nailed down. And that's why I go a little further and say, thus atheism is my opinion. And if that is correct, if my opinion is correct, then for those other 25 years that I passed through hardships, that I knelt in prayer and felt communion and felt like God was setting up coincidences within my life that gave me direction and pushed me certain ways and helped me make life decisions, if God had not been there the whole time, then it was Jerry DeWitt that had survived those situations. It was Jerry DeWitt that had the strength. It was Jerry DeWitt that was intelligent enough, strong enough, intuitive enough, compassionate enough, in love with other people enough to go through some of life's hardest situations. And all of a sudden I realized that I could make it through that one as well. All of a sudden I realized that I was connecting with people, and there were relationships beginning to develop, and there were places that I could talk. And there were places where I could minister, if you will, and even come and preach in a quasi-Pentecostal style, maybe even at MIT. All of a sudden I began to realize that I possessed a strength I didn't know that I had because I had been giving someone else the credit the entire time. All of a sudden I realized that there was beauty, and that my eyes could see the beauty. That my eyes could see the warmth. That when I had picked up the Bible and I found something good in it, it really was a reflection of the goodness that was already in me. When I would find something beautiful in the Scripture, it was really a reflection of the beauty that I already possessed. And the other thing that happened was that all of a sudden, a clarity came into my life. about what was meaningful. I had sacrificed my marriage for 25 years in order to save souls and save the world. And when she left, I knew I would give up the whole world for her. That there was a meaning in relationship. It didn't have to be cosmic. It didn't have to be grand. It didn't have to be something you would write a novel about. It didn't have to be something that once penned would somehow become sacred scripture. It was human. It was life. It was present. It was now. My son, my home, my yard, and the success of other people's lives suddenly crystallized into a meaning that was far more than anything I'd ever possessed. And it was enough. And so I simply say to you this evening that you possess everything that you need. That you're able. Life's going to be hard. People in your life are going to leave. Some, unfortunately, are even going to pass away. There's going to be trials. There's going to be financial circumstances. There's going to be hardships. You may end up having to live off food stamps, waiting for that great job to be a partner to come to pass. You may be betrayed. You may be offended. You may be lonely. But one thing you'll never be is ill-equipped. Because the human race is the color of the cosmos. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Adam Reynolds. I'm one of the chaplains here at MIT. Well, if you're like me, you really enjoyed that. You want to give them another round of applause. So now we have time for a little bit of Q&A. So if there's questions you'd like to ask of either Dave or Jerry or both, that's what we'll do right now.
I have a question for Dave. So you spoke a lot about your personal experiences and how you talk to professors about different religions. Would you consider Christianity to be a very personal thing, like based on personal experiences, or is it universal?
I certainly don't think Christianity is universal. I think I see all religions as being cultural. And so I've been in enough other settings where there are historic roots of Christendom or of Islam or of Buddhism, where the disconnection between the religious structure and